All right, everybody. Welcome to another podcast of Wood, Air, and Metal. It's the last one before we have a very special guest next time. We're both looking forward to gleaning much guitar guru wisdom from this cat up and coming.
And not having to just listen to each other.
Yeah, and I mean, we do kind of pay attention to each other for the most part. And it all depends on how many beers we've had, if that.
True.
How many beers Tim's had. I'd stick with Scotch, generally. Though I do partake in a bad. I haven't had beer in my house, and
Oh, really?
it's not that I'm like teetotaling it or anything. I just haven't been in the mood for it. Basically, I go through swings. It's like sometimes it's like constant, and then other times it's like I just don't care.
Yeah, no, same here. We kind of go. Beers. I guess we generally have some around, but we'll kind of go through phases of bourbon and wine.
Yeah.
And most of the scotches I like are just too expensive, so I don't buy those.
That's also the problem. Is like I'm not an alcoholic. I just enjoy the taste, which is a problem because it's not cheap. Like my favorite go-to bottle is like $80, so it's like.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, when I was in Scotland like a year ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
What was that? It was a 17-year something, and of course it was only like $4 there or something.
Yeah.
For a glass. Yeah. But I think around here it's like a $150 bottle or something.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But it was so good.
Yeah, I did have a friend of mine bought me a bottle of Macallan 18 for standing in his wedding, and I was like, dude, that is.
You're like, can you get married again?
Well, I won't tell the story. Well, maybe I will. We opened it on his wedding day, and we drank the last of it when his divorce was final. So it's kind of morbid on that one.
So there's still a chance. There's a chance for another one.
Chance for another one on that one. That's why I'm bringing it up. A very morbid.
Yeah, so he doesn't forget.
Exactly. So, but that was disgustingly good. That was like drinking liquid caramel, and I'm surprised I had it last for that 9 months. That all that because it was
only 9 months.
Yeah. Yep. That was something that I would have liked to have known yesterday, type of situation. So that was the way that it was. But whatever, we got some good scotch out of it and good memories. So
sure. Good deal.
Going from divorce to guitar, and scotch for the guitar mostly. So
these seem like trends, or it seem like topics that go together pretty well, actually.
It depends on how many guitars you buy and what you get caught with. You know, the worst. What was that? The worst fear is that a man's wife sells his guitars for what he told her he paid for them.
Oh, right.
Oh man. But on that note, we've been very restrictive with our texting conversations because, like, we'll start and then it's like, no, let's wait for the podcast. Like, Tim will interject and be like, no, we should wait for the podcast. And I'll do the same thing. Like, nope, I'll make a note in my notepad app and here, and we'll keep that for the podcast and bring the subject back up again, rather than dive into it and expend all of our glorious input.
Yeah, it's funny how quickly we can get like riled up about it. So
hopefully
we'll bring some of that energy today.
Oh, I think we will. I think we will. Let's just dive right in. Let's start with the Holdsworth quote. The Alan Holdsworth. If you don't know who he is, stop the podcast. Go listen to him, preferably on some place that gives him more than 0.00004 cents a stream. But whatever you can get on, get a clue into who he is as a musician and just the absolutely stunning player that he is. And then come back and pick up where you left off. I think most podcast apps just pick up where you left off. So, it'll be like no time has happened. And now you'll know who Alan Holdsworth is.
True.
We can his quote about practicing, which in that case, Tim, that's all you.
Wait, do you have the quote in front of you?
I do not have the quote.
You look like you could have the quote. Are you going to find it?
Yeah, you got it.
My memory is shorter than a goldfish, I think.
What they actually have a long memory. That's a myth. So there's
much longer than mine.
Okay, hang on. I gotta scroll back through our conversation, which is gigantic. I'm into the fuzz.
It'll be worth it, I think.
Hang on, it's loading. Oh, don't crash on me. It's not gonna crash.
So I guess why he's looking for that. One of the things about Alan Holdsworth, if you're not familiar, is he's got to be one of the most unique guitar characters ever. There's a lot of people that have sort of copy this thing now a little bit, or try to copy his thing, but he came out of such a left field with it. There really wasn't anyone like him that came up, and a lot of that is his own doing, which we'll kind of talk about here. I kind of, and I'm remembering what the quote was. I was thinking of something else for a second, but so Alan Holdsworth is from the more the jazz fusion side of things. His dad was a pianist, like a good jazz pianist, out of England, and so Alan's whole take is he actually never really wanted to play guitar. He always wanted to play something else, usually saxophone, is what he says. It just didn't appeal to him. He liked it, but it wasn't like the thing that called out to him. But saxophones were expensive, so his dad got him a guitar. And then, from what I can tell from conversations that people have had with him, that his dad his dad would teach him stuff about music, and it wasn't from a guitarist perspective, right? It was from just a piano, or more pianistic take on it. And so Alan just pretty much immediately started applying the stuff his dad would show him to guitar, and he would just figure out how to do it. No one showed him or told him like, oh, this is how guitar players play a C chord or something. His dad would say, oh, here's the C chord voicing on the piano, and Alan would try to figure out how to do it on the guitar. So he's like chordal approach and everything is very unique. And then he got a lot of his single line playing or whatever is more like sax influenced or violin or something. Anyway, looks like you might have the quote up. Did you find it?
You said that you were remembering it, and so
okay, then I can speak to it. I don't remember the exact words.
It's like now I gotta scroll back.
No, it's okay. So basically, Alan, though, he's an improviser. So he's a composer and improviser. He's got a very unique style. And he's talking about sort of improvisation and how you practice. So he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he practices in a way that he hopes when he plays for people or records music that he doesn't actually play the stuff that he practiced. Mm-hmm. So his goal as an improviser is to not like reiterate some lick or something that he learned or even some concept directly of what he's been practicing, but that in the moment he like relishes the time when he's not doing that, when he's not just like regurgitating whatever he practiced, but in the moment, because of everything he's done to prepare for that, he's actually free to start inventing stuff he never played before, to try something that he never did, which is kind of opposite of a lot of players, really. I mean, particularly any artist who performs, and this is kind of like classical falls in this realm too in a lot of ways. But and most rock guitar players who like sort of play notes or solos back verbatim, or play the exact part that they played on the record, that's not really like you're practicing theirs to make sure that every time you play that section that you always play it at least up to some level and that your fingers go in the right place and that it becomes sort of natural. But for Alan, and for a lot of improvisers, or some improvisers, the goal is to really never do anything you practiced, which is sort of an interesting way to think about practicing. So how would you practice to not actually play the things you practiced?
I think like one of just to kind of interject one thing that's in the back.
Ahead.
The first thing that I would say is like he clearly practiced some type of technical stuff. Like there's no
certainly.
So it's not like we're saying like he never did like drills in terms of getting his finger coordination or anything like that. Yeah,
and also just sorry to interrupt and then I'll let you go. This is 20 years after he started playing, right? Exactly. This is his philosophy at that point. This is not the everything like building up to that point.
Yeah, and that's what I just wanted to clarify. It's like just for clarity, he wasn't just in there like kind of like feeling around it and hoping that he got stuff right or whatever. Like he did the work, but he just had a unique approach in terms of when he was practicing it at a level where he could apply the established principles and technique weren't a hurdle for him. So that was out of the way. But then he could take it and do whatever he wanted with it at that point. So he had control, mastery to a degree in order to get to that next mastery.
Yeah.
And that's, I just want to, not that I don't think we were confusing people, but I think that's one of the things.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it wasn't like day one he started that concept.
Exactly. But I think the concept's brilliant, and I will interject a little bit on the behalf of us classical guitarists. As much as we do that and practice the same thing again and again, that's just part of it. There is a lot of discovery in terms of getting the phrasing that you want, getting the tone qualities that you want, and the nuances in that, And then I distinctly remember when I saw Jason Vio playing at some artist showcase thing. It was a smaller venue than I would have expected for him, but either way, it was a chance to see Jason play. So who cares? So he and I prefer the smaller ones, but anyways, so he was doing the 995 BWV Bach Lute Suite 995 and playing the prelude to it, and like he had this one shift that and totally botched it. It was a split second, but it was enough in a room full of classical guitarists started to go, a little kind of subconsciously, but at the same time, it's like we know he can nail it, so whatever. Yeah. And then afterwards, I overheard him talking to one of his students, and this is why I'm bringing it up because it stuck with me. He's like, "Oh yeah, I was just trying something new, and clearly it didn't work." So, And that's it. So we do that. Like we'll take approaches that are a little bit outside of what we've practiced to see, like, oh, let's try it this way and see what happens and what type of response that I get. Changing is usually that'll be like a tone color thing, or adding trills or a different positional thinking.
Oh, sure.
But it's clearly not the same level. Just to put that out there, but at the same time, put a temperament on it. It's clearly not the same level as freeform jazz explosion, Spinal Tap 2.0.
Well, so that is, we should. Well, I'm gonna support you here.
Okay.
And other classical guitars in that. I think that it's still part of the same frame of mind as what you were just saying. So, like for instance. Some rooms you play in are deader than others. Some rooms the notes ring out more than others.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Some rooms you do like a little. Why am I blanking on some kind of like triplet thing or whatever? Like a trill. Sorry, you do like a trill, and they don't come out at all. You can't hear it. You can't really get your fingers under it because of the room. But other rooms they really come out and it just sounds great. I like to think in that moment, a classical musician is going to take advantage of whatever that room is.
Oh, totally.
Right.
Yeah.
So you might milk that one note more than you normally would because it just hits the walls just right. And and you can sit there. Also, I think it was a few months ago, I was listening to a lot of violin stuff, in particular Bach, and it was really interesting sort of listening through the different ages, like the players from the 50s to the 60s to playing the same piece to today's sort of standard way of playing it, which I'm not really much of a fan of. But a lot of the sort of 50s to 70s violinists were more let's say romantic with Bach.
No, absolutely. That's exactly.
It's beautiful. It's just because they'll take these liberties with that piece and again, I think in the right room, in the right atmosphere, where certain notes just come out so much better or whatever, and they're willing to go for it and sort of milk that trill that was extra long or really change the feel and flow of the tempo and the piece and stuff like that, just to get those notes to sort of stick out a little bit more.
Oh, yeah.
And I would think that that's very much the same. It's just, very much the same kind of deal what Alan was talking about. It's those moments when you're there, I bet if you heard Itzhak Perlman play that same piece in a different room, in a different day, it would sound different. And that's very interesting.
That is one of the things that I definitely do when I'm in a new space. if I have enough time before the concert, which I generally do, but sometimes traffic is in the way or whatever. But back when there was more concertizing opportunities, but it was always a matter of playing in the space first, just to get a feel for what's coming back at you, what notes are going to ring. Like we talked before about how guitars are tuned to specific notes, and I'd say. That definitely factors into a room as well. Some rooms are exactly like you said; they
Yeah.
bounce, like a B will just be like, wow, that's really live compared to all these other notes. So in my head, it's like, okay, I got to pull back a little bit when I'm playing anything that has a B in it. And just to keep the balance going. Otherwise, it's like a note that's not supposed to be in the front suddenly shows up and it's like, hi, I'm here. It's like, no, I didn't
Right.
really. It was just the room. Um, and the other thing that affects it too is how quick you'll take something at tempo. Like, because I brought in Steve to do a concert at St. Sebastian's in Akron, and the room is incredibly live. I love it. Like, it's like you can play a note and it'll ring. It's probably still ringing,
Yeah.
like
Right.
you know. But one of the things that he mentioned is like I can't play this piece that I wrote at tempo because it's so live. It just sounds like a jumbled mess. If I go too quick, it just by the time it gets to the fourth row, that person's like, I have no idea what he's playing.
Yeah.
I can see
Right.
his fingers go, and that's totally true. So it's nice. Some rooms are so live you can put the brakes on your tempo to keep it so that it's clear for the audience,
Yeah.
and
Right.
that a lot of people don't understand what's going on with that behind the scenes. It's like you're actively listening, you're playing off of what you hear back and everything like that in order to really, I guess you could say, improvise in the room, at least in terms of the lines that are fixed, kind of going outside of it with those particular aspects.
Yeah. And so then the question becomes, to narrow the focus a little bit, how do
Yeah.
you practice for that so that you can do that in those situations? You know, and I,
It,
and I and I think that would be very much in line, even though a different side of the brain perhaps than the
yeah.
improv, but it's very much the same thing. It's like, how do you prepare yourself with the right tools and the right amount of knowledge and the right dexterity and all these other things, so that in that moment you can take advantage of that.
I think that this kind of piggybacks on the conversation of what, like, you were talking about with getting ready for a gig and what goes into getting ready for a gig for you. And uh, I haven't had anything on the books officially for a while, so ever since COVID started, so I haven't really done a whole lot of like gig prep. But one of the like this routine that I go through, it's finding all the most difficult. Well, for my own self, the first thing that I'll do is like find the most difficult spots in the music and pull those out. So that becomes my practice routine. So just in case life gets crazy, at least I'm nailing the difficult things every day and getting those under my belt. And then one of the big things is, and this applies with the improvising aspect of it, is that I'll play the concert in different directions. Like even in this room, I'll play it facing the monitor. I'll play it facing that wall because it's tone difference from coming back from here to going into that dead space there. But even as I turn my head, it's like it sounds totally different to me over in that direction.
Yeah.
I'll play it over there. I'll play it this way. I'll play it that way. I'll play it in a different room of the house, just to be able to get used to playing it regardless of the feedback aspect and not having that throw me off. Like that's the first thing. That the first reason I do that. The second reason is just to be able to hear like what do I change when I can't hear specific things as well as before. It's almost gotten to a point where I've wanted to bring like a miking system just to have in-ear monitors of what's going out. As in terms of a classical guitar, all the music's going away from you first before it comes back.
Yeah.
So you have this like natural delay between your actions, as slight as it is, and what you hear back. So when you're in that moment, it's like you're always kind of playing off of the fact a little bit. It's almost like you have to prep yourself ahead. During the notes, it's like you're in certain passages and you want this to kind of crescendo, so you have to get it into your head mentally of, all right, I have to dig in more here, because if you're trying to do it in the space, it's already happened.
Yeah.
Like
Sure.
so that is kind
That makes me. I have a question then. This is always an interesting question for improvisers, but in the classical world, when you're playing your best, what's going through your head? Like the moments where you're like, those like moments where everything's going good.
yeah. Yep.
It sounds good. It feels good. You're like not really paying attention because you're way in it, I think,
Oh
but you're
yeah.
not thinking like what hand position or anything. It's just kind of flowing out of you. So,
Yeah.
well, what's going on in your head in those times, or do you get to those places where you're not thinking of anything and it just flows like that?
I would say that it's more of the just, and this is a clearly subjective thing because I've heard other players being the complete opposite of what I'm about to say. But for myself, it's like I don't have to think about it. It's just there. It's just coming out. It's coming out great. I'm at a point of comfort to where I'm enjoying listening to the music that I'm playing. I mean, I'm thinking about the parts, but I'm not thinking about the parts in a type of like I'm trying to
Right.
like what's I don't know how to put it. It's like that whole like cartoon Tom and Jerry thing with they have the stacked saucers and they're trying to hold it to get it across the room so it
Yeah.
doesn't.
Right.
It's like that aspect of the positional shifting and everything else for difficult stuff isn't there. And it's more just like, okay, I'm just setting it down. And at that point, it's just the music that's going through my head, and it's almost like if I think
What,
about it,
like you're hearing the music and that's
no,
what's going through your head, or like you're
I'm hearing the
reading
music.
reading the music, or what's going through your head? What do you mean by music?
Yeah, I suppose I need to make that clear. It's like I'm hearing the music as it's coming back to me, and I'm not thinking about it in the sense of like this is coming next, this is coming next. So watch this, watch this, watch this. It's just kind of there. But to counteract that, if I try to think about it,
All right.
like, it's like the saucers come down.
Yeah. Right.
It's like Wile E. Coyote walking out over the edge and being able to stand on nothing until he looks down. He's like, oh, whoops, boom, and then he
Right.
falls. And I think that totally happens. Like it's one of those things when I at least with the experience that I have is when I'm in that moment to just let it happen rather than and it's almost like a mental fight of like just let it ride, just let it ride, just let it ride,
All
just let it
right.
ride.
It'll be
It's
all
like
right. It'll be all right. Oh no, it won't be all right. Oh
I
no.
need it's like if there's a soundtrack in my head, it would be a whole lot of bleeps just to keep it kid friendly and a lot of but at the same time, when you hit those particular spots where it is like that, it makes everything worth it. Like absolutely, there's
Yeah.
nothing better.
Sure.
Absolutely, and I mean there is like nothing better for me when it goes that well. It's like hell yeah, it.
Yeah,
If
I
I
mean
went,
that's very much like the an improvisation. Like you're when you're in it, you're not thinking like what scales, chords, any of that. Like you just, it's not that you couldn't say it. Like it's not like you couldn't like cut it and be like, oh, that I guess that was a Phrygian thing over the, you could do that maybe,
yeah,
but you're just not thinking about it. Like it's not, you're not even considering if it's what mode it is or this or that or it's just flow. It's like this flow thing.
yeah, and maybe it's a brainwave sync thing. I remember when I was taking lessons with Jack Chance at the University of Akron, mainly because I wanted to break out, literally like what you were talking about with Alan and his dad, where his dad was the pianist and just he
Yeah,
kind of those things. It's like I want to start thinking about the guitar as music rather than the guitar. Where everything's like your pentatonic way up. Oh, that was my headphone cable. I didn't screw that up.
sure.
It's like where everything's a pentatonic and or this shape over this chord and something like that. I wanted to get into more of the idea of like how are the notes functioning? Am I thinking in terms of the note relationships and so on? And Jack says something really good. I mean, outside of like totally kicking my ass, in a good way, but he was just saying like you start out with the intellectual game. You start out working on that and connecting the notes and seeing how the notes go over this, and then you put the physical game in there to where you're drilling it over it, you're getting it, you're finding your groove, you're finding the placement of everything, and then he's like eventually not his terminology, but it's like this synchronicity that happens to where you lose the mental aspect in the sense of alertness, but it becomes just a gut feeling. It's like you've
Sure.
trained it so much and you're playing by feel, but not with the absence of technical knowledge. It's like
Yeah, I mean,
it,
it's much like speaking.
yeah,
Like when you, that's the whole goal. Like a lot you hear improvisers talk about it a lot. It's just like talking. Could I tell you that was a verb or a noun or whatever? Like I could, but when you're talking, you never think about that stuff. You just talk. You just say
Yeah.
whatever you need to say. Same with improvisation. You've learned enough about the sound language, so to speak. You know what a flat nine sounds like against this thing. You don't have to like say, "Oh, that's a flat nine," or "That's a verb," "That's that's an adverb." You don't have to do that. You just use it. You use it as a way of communicating some idea.
Yep.
So
Yep. Absolutely. Or what's the whole thing? It's like you never think about a kiss when you're in the middle of it. At least you should. So, so that and that's I mean I guess there's definitely a romantic aspect to improvising in that particular way. Like you begin to it's so weird to talk about it and try to put it into words, because when you're in that spot, that's the last thing that's going through your head, at least for me. Like when I do decide to improvise, if it's going well, it's just kind of doing its thing and it's speaking on its own, and my hands just happen to be moving around.
Yeah, I think when it goes the best is when it's coming from like what you're hearing as opposed to what your hands are doing. Like I know, so when I studied a bit with Chris Crocco, who's a great guitar player. We'll put a link in there if I remember. Who studied with horn players, like some of the greatest jazz horn players ever, including George Garzone. But one of the things he was talking to me about was like with a sax player, it's like, hey, you want to play an A? You just play an A. But guitar players, we go, oh, which A? You want this A or 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 this, you know, which finger should I use? My first finger, my second finger, my third finger, you know, like this whole like mess of things happens when you're thinking like that. But the goal is when I want to play an A, I just play an A. And it's so simple, but it's hard to get to that point on guitar because we're so. A lot of it's the way that guitar is taught, which is not note oriented. It tends to be like pattern oriented, shape oriented. Like, oh, if you know this A, then use this A because it's the cage thing or whatever. Instead of just being like, oh, here's an A, here's an A, here's an A, here's an A. You know, just being able to get there because you just know it's there. You're not. Yeah. We're always there's like a big fight for a long time to get to the point where you just play an A because you want to play an A. And so that was a lot of like what his whole philosophy was getting to. And I think that's what Alan's talking about a little bit too. It's like you're not doing it because that's what your hand goes to, you know, because you worked out some crazy, you know, thing or whatever.
Yeah.
It's because that's what you're hearing at the moment and you just do it. You know, and I think too, like for me, I have this band, the Night Terrors, the one that I did, and then actually really any band, it's not really a successful night for me unless there was at least one thing I did that I've never done before, like never in 30 years of playing ever tried before. Like if I don't do that at least once in a gig, then I feel like super down. It's like I might as well like want to never play again kind of thing. And it's kind of funny. It's funny how that is. I don't think a lot of people are like that actually. I think where you tell me like Julian Lage, it's like you play what you practice kind of idea.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that's true or not.
Well, I think the way that he approached it was like everybody practices scales, you know, in a simple. You know, doing it that way, and he's like, "How do you? If you practice just going up and down the scale, you know, again and again and again, all you're gonna do is get really good at going up and down the scale."
Yeah, sure.
And so he's like, what he would do, and I'm totally stealing this from his master class, is like he would pick two spots and say, how many different ways can I go from this low G to this G here, using the notes of the diatonic. You know, just figuring out different ways to land on this particular note, starting from here, but not in a order, and it doesn't have to always be ascending. Like it doesn't, however he decides to get to it. So it was a really fascinating approach to things. And he's like, if you're doing these particular things, he's like, you don't do it to memorize a particular pattern that you think is cool, though that, obviously you have your own little stylistic things come out of that.
Okay, then I take it back because it sounds good. Go ahead. Continue.
No, exactly. And that's exactly what it is. It's like, oh, that was great. You want to capture that. But that's also part of discovering your own particular voice on the guitar, is you find the things that catch your ear and that you enjoy, and you repeat those enough to make it so that you have I'd say it's like almost, if we're using a comparison with language, it's almost like coming up or getting an idiom in the language, like, now that I'm using the term, I'm totally blanking on it. That's no skin off my back type of thing. We use that so much, well, to a degree, to describe like, oh, that's not a problem for me. But we could say that's not a problem for me, but the idiom of the language is no skin, the cultural thing with it. So to shrink that down to guitar level, that's kind of like what we do, where, somebody might approach that G going, another guy might, right, you there, another guy just might be off, or whichever. So whatever,
your little preferences or whatever to get there.
Yep.
Yeah, that reminds me very much of like a Wayne Krantz thing. I don't know if you've ever seen this. So Wayne Krantz, another fantastic, unbelievable guitar player, probably has like the best time like of any guitar player ever. At least in like the straight 16th, like funky groove sense of time. Because he works on it endlessly. If you ever hear him talk. But he has this book called The Improviser's OS. And there's actually a new version now, and I haven't seen it. But the original version is kind of funny. It's this little white book, and you open it, and it's every possible combination of every note from 1 to 12. So it's just like a computerized chart that comes out, right? So it goes like, oh, you could do 1 and 2, and so say 1 was F, then 1 and this is one combination. Sorry, my guitar's not in tune. But then you could have 1, 2, 4 or whatever. And that's the only that's your like scale sort of thing that you can use, and it's every one up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Okay.
So every combination possible between all 12 notes.
It's been a while since I brought him up, so I'm going to interject Steve Vai's approach just to piggyback, because he kind of has the same thing. Because he was talking about like he would come up with some type of funky lick or a scale, in one sense, build a scale and then write the music around that using chords based off of that particular thing. And it might have been something typical, like a Mixolydian mode or whatever. But there's other stuff where he's just like, I come up with this weird lick that's out there, and I'll take the notes and be like, okay, let's build chords out of these. And let's build everything else around this particular thing. It might be like, a Locrian sharp 5 or whatever. But however he's doing it, he's coming up with a different approach besides one particular, this chord over this scale, and that's it.
Right.
And that.
So not to finish the Krantz thing though. So what he does, so what you do though, once you pick one of those. So and then you restrict yourself to 4 frets.
Okay.
And you pick a key, whatever key, doesn't matter. And you're only allowed to play one of the 4 frets. And so, like, say it was a G major scale that just happened to be, so you're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever.
Yeah.
And you started here, normally you would think you could do that, but you only have 4 frets, so you can't actually get to that B.
Okay.
So you only have these options. So those are the only notes, but then make music with just those. Whatever. Yeah. And then, have a click or whatever with it. And then you can make your chords up with that too. Sorry, I'm still out of tune. But, so you make up chords just with those 4 frets. So you don't have any other things you can use. and it sort of gets you out of the pattern of using like, oh, I'm using my 3-finger thing or
Yeah.
whatever. And I picked G major scale just because we know what it sounds like, but it might be like 1 flat 2 4 5 flat 7 whatever, something like that.
Yeah.
And then whatever that is in that 4 fret thing, and that's all you get to choose from. And it just as a practice.
Yeah.
And then maybe do it here. Same one, now different shape, or same notes, same key, but see if you can do it in these 4 frets and these 4 frets. So it sort of gets you out of being able to use like licks or hand patterns or something that you're used to. And you're allowed to do, like he's even like, you can do bends or whatever to notes that are outside of that 4 frets, as long as they are part of the original scale. But it's still making you like use a bend, where you normally might have done this, but you can't go to this fret, so now you have to bend to it or something. Anyway, it's kind of funny though. So you printed that whole book. It's just like this little card book thing. I wish I knew where it was. And you read through it and you're like, this, why do I have this? And there's a little like frequently asked questions at the end. And so he's like, so what the hell is this? I think that's like the first question. What the hell is this book?
That's awesome. To be that good and that self-aware, and yet at the same time be able to poke fun of yourself is the sign of true musician maturity on that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Just kind of whizzed with that. So in terms of the Holdsworth approach with everything, it happens to be you spend time sitting in the room, obviously getting your technique up because you have to be able to not have a physical hurdle to get to where you want. And then it's a matter of getting a point of familiarity with what your ear is telling you to play to be able to pull it out in a quick amount of time.
Yeah.
To an extent, just to kind of like sum up that idea. And it's great. It's like one of those things. The best thing is you're able to have a chord progression going and you're just friggin' nailing everything as it goes by. And it takes me away. That is great. And I mean, granted, my improvisation at classical levels are like a lot different now than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a jazz person, like making changes at some point doesn't become like a big deal in a way, because it's just what we do all the time.
Oh yeah, I'm not talking in that sense. I'm talking just like really having a solo that's speaking well.
So it's like what I heard. Speaking of Holdsworth, he had mentioned somebody had said, well, what would you do different or something like that, and he was talking about how he wished he would have realized early on that the like playing the changes was not as important as playing the line, so to speak. So like where the line wants to go, you should follow the line. And if it's the good line, it will take you to the place you need to go. So like so the changes might be going this way and you might be going this way, but you both come strong to this point here. And then it was important to learn that sometimes you have to go follow the line, because that's the thing that's the melody, that's the thing you need to follow, and then hit that. As long as it's going to the same place in a sense, then you're actually making a better move. It's kind of interesting to think about that too, because it's also why he gets some crap from like some jazz people, because like, well, he didn't make the change there or whatever, But it's like, well, yeah, but it's like, listen to the line's taking you exactly there. But because it wasn't done in like a jazz way, because there's all these like with jazz, like say there's a 1-6-4 or 2-5 kind of progression, which you see a lot of. There's all these like sort of accepted ways of not playing 1-6-2-5 and getting back to 1. So you might put like Coltrane changes in there, or you might do, but if it's some other method of doing it, that's not one of the like 10 acceptable methods, then it's like, well, you didn't make the changes. But if you did Coltrane changes, which sound nothing like the actual changes, it'll pull you back to one, like where you're supposed to,
Yeah.
because it's strong resolution. You can do that in a lot of different ways. Like I said, anyway, there's sort of like the quote unquote accepted ones, which are all great and all wonderful and they sound amazing. But anyway, the line itself could go somewhere.
Yeah. And I think this, let's way to put it, to kind of segue a little bit in the other topic of talking about, like, when you were bringing up, like, some guys use your guitar as the tone aspect, the amp and the guitar, and other guys are just the amp aspect. One, where would you put Holdsworth in those three particular things? And two, where would you put yourself?
Okay, so let me explain what.
I
had an interesting conversation going on my Facebook page, which you could go find if you so desire. It actually was from 3 years ago. I had played a gig, I think it was in Erie, with Chroma Drive, one of the bands that's unfortunately not been playing for the last couple of years. That might have even been the last gig. But I couldn't hear myself at all at the gig. It's one of those things with the guitar player, especially in like a louder, like this is like a fusion-y rock loud band. We have a CD, you should go buy it. Anyway, or an album you can go download, Chroma Drive. Anyway, sort of like louder, we called it like grunge jazz or something. And I couldn't hear myself at all. It was kind of loud in there in that room, and the room was pretty live. I couldn't hear my amp, which really sucks when you can't do that because you can't work with the amp at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of was like, hey, what is everybody doing with this? Because I really don't like amp stands. So like when you take an amp off the floor and you put it on an amp stand, you lose the bass like response that happens with the floor. And then some people will say, well, yeah, once you mic it, you don't get that anyway, and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But for me, the experience that I like is hearing that. The other problem is guitar amps are very directional. So like if the amp's on the ground and it's by your feet and you're really close to it, what you hear standing next to it is a lot different than when somebody like 20 feet in front of it the other way is getting like destroyed by the sound of it. But depending on how loud you are or whatever. So it sounds very different depending on where you're standing. So there's an element of like you kind of need the amp sort of like facing you. So you either have to get far enough away from the amp that you are in a good spot to hear it, or you have to lean it up, or you have to put it on a stand or something. But again, I don't like amp stands. I've never been a fan. I've done it a bunch of times. So I was like, and then another problem is monitors. So when you play on a stage when there's a PA, I suppose if I had my own like monitoring engineer and stuff, it could probably sound pretty good. But when you're like setting up and like somebody's just like, hey, there's a, like they just kind of like do it real quick. They don't really like, you want some more guitar in there or whatever. It never really sounds very good. It's almost always like very harsh sounding or something. I haven't had a very good experience with that in general. And a lot of that's just like timing. It's like, well, you only have like 5 minutes to do sound check. And so you can't do it. All this along went, so I started a conversation like, hey, and of course I have a million guitar friends or whatever on Facebook. And so they're all, and a lot of them are gigging. And when I kind of noticed, this actually was 3 years ago, but I sort of saw the thing and I was like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a gig? So I kind of reposted it recently by just adding a comment. And then more people started commenting on it. So I think there's like 200 some comments on this thread.
Dang, man.
And from everyone from like, let's say more classical guitar type people who play with amplification to jazz people who play like a big hollow body, archtop, to guys who are in like death metal bands, to people that are blues guitarists. That like there's sort of like quite the variety of people responding on there. And one of the things I noticed was the different types of responses you got. So some of the responses were just turn up the thing, right? Because another thing, guitar amps, they sound better when they're louder. Well, tube amps do. They sound better when they're louder. Some of the people's responses were, well, I use an Axe Effects, so it always sounds a certain way, and I bring my own monitor. Some of the people were saying, well, if I play with a band that listens, then it's never a problem. Kind of attitude, or not, I don't want to say attitude, but like kind of response that, well, if I play with that kind of thing. Another person was like, well, everybody should just turn down. If you can't hear yourself, then everyone should turn down. Everyone should play quieter. And it's sort of disrespectful if they don't play quieter. Was sort of the insinuation. And then some people were, you never turn up the amp. Like turning up the amp ruins the whole thing. So it got a lot of different responses. So then it actually got me thinking, like I was sort of hypothesizing. And I sort of have made up like 3 general.
Yeah.
This is just a hypothesis, and don't shoot the messenger. And I think everyone's a little bit of all 3 of these. So let's start there. Yeah. Nobody's just one of these things. But I think that we may lean into some of these, depending on what our thing is, more than others. So the first category, to me, is the player that just wants to amplify the sound of their guitar. So to me, this would be an obvious, easy one. Would be like, if you're a classical guitar player and you were playing somewhere there was a PA, you really don't want the PA changing the sound of the guitar. You want it to sound just like your guitar, exactly like it, but louder, right? And then there's also a lot of jazz guitar players, especially more like, let's say, more traditional style of jazz guitar players who want that too. They have an arch top. It sounds great. They really just want some kind of amp that doesn't change the sound of their guitar very much, if at all. Hopefully not, and it sounds just like an amplified version of their guitar. Maybe there's a little bit of like, they can add like a little bit of EQ here and there, but they're really not trying to change the sound of it very much. Then the second category that I mentioned was, there's players where the amp itself is just as important as the guitar. That the guitar and the amp work together as a whole. It'd almost be like having the mouthpiece of a saxophone and then the body. You can't have like the guitar is the body where you play stuff on, but without the mouthpiece, it doesn't really sound like much. And so you're actually using the amp as an instrument, where how it responds to you is how you play. It's how notes come out on it. You're using it as a back and forth sort of thing. So to not be able to hear your amp in particular, and for those kind of players, is really detrimental. Because it's all about, like, it's almost like there's no guitar then. Like, you're not actually playing your instrument, you're just playing nothing. And so there's that kind of player. And some obvious sort of like picking there is, I would say, like almost like bluesish guitar players in general. In particular, people like Michael Landau or something, where they like really milk the heck out of the amp. Like, it really matters. Like, just a little micro turn of the knob changes the response of the amp, and it's very important that thing happens in a way that they can use it, because that's part of the sound of the thing they're making. Where like the first category, they wouldn't change any knobs or anything, right? That's not going to be their thing. They're not going to be changing knobs. They're not going to be touching anything. They're going to set it, forget it, and just play. And they're going to, any like tonal changes or stuff will come in their technique on the instrument, the guitar itself, which should be similar to, like, if you're playing acoustic guitar or something, you want it to just do the thing that you do. You're not relying on the amp to do any of that for you. The amp's just there to make you louder. And then the third category that I had, which is sort of a side shoot of the first category, is the you're using amplification and you're using effects and sort of things like that, and that's your sound. But it doesn't really matter so much what the amp is, because ultimately what you're trying to get to is that sound. So that it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. It's kind of a funny line, but like, yeah, this is most of your like rock guitar player sort of things. This lists in my hypothesis where it's like you got to get that sound that you had on the record, and that's the sound you want. It happens to be this amp and this pedal and this guitar, but it's that sound. You're not milking the amp like as an extra instrument, but it is part of like your ultimate sound. And what you're really trying to get out of it is that it amplifies it to a certain volume that people can hear it. But it's not like in general, it's not about you like how the amp responds to you. It's about getting that end sound. That's the goal. So I would say a lot of like, especially like the more modern metal bands, that's very much the sort of take. It's like you have this is where like the axe effects and stuff really shine. You can put a sound up there, you know what it's going to sound like when you go like this, and it always sounds the same, and you have a very good expectation for that sound. And when you switch patches, it sounds like this and like that, so you have this very like predefined like end sound. It doesn't really matter like that you're working with the amp so much. Again, these are all in percentages. And there might even be more categories, but these are the three that I sort of thought of.
Yeah. No,
so to your question about Holdsworth, I think he's mostly in that category 3, actually.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a fuzzy area. So again, everybody's a little bit of all the categories, I think. So there's 3, and there's definitely some 2, especially with his like lead sound that he uses. But he has a very like specific clean sound that he uses that always sounds very, I mean, I'm going to say the same. I mean, it altered over the years, but generally like he put the clean sound on, it sounds like that clean sound. He turns the clean sound off or whatever, it doesn't sound like that sound anymore. The distorted sound has a very specific, like it's kind of the people that like, here's my lead channel, here's my lead sound, here's my clean sound, here's my rhythm sound. Like it's that kind of person is mostly that 3 category that I'm hypothesizing about. They're saying there's those sounds. It never changes really. Like it might evolve over time, but it's very specific. You could program it. But his lead thing, he'll kind of like work with the amp a little bit. Like I think you can hear him like sort of like a certain note can do a certain thing, like he'll kind of milk it. So that sort of comes a little bit from the 2 thing. I would say almost none of it is the 1 category.
Yeah.
So then where do I fall on this? Well, so if I'm playing acoustic or something, then I'm totally in the 1 category. Right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like a given. If you're playing any type of generally quote unquote unamplified instrument, you're going to fall into the 1 category because you want that particular sound that comes out of it just as it is. So. And
I would say when I'm playing jazz with like a hollow body kind of thing, I tend to fall closer to that number 1 still. I don't know if it's all of number 1, but it's a little bit of 1 and number 2 for me on that front. What's interesting though, I think a lot of the like more modern guitar players, let's say like Kurt Rosenwinkel or something, is much more on the 3 side of things. It's
I was gonna say his sound is, I mean, it can be out.
It's a very like specific sound. I think the amp itself matters less than the effects or something.
It's kind of like Gustav Assisi Brazil, because he uses axe effects, but he only uses it for the effects, none of the amp modeling or anything else.
Yeah.
Well,
I think primarily most like any of the amp modeling people, they're definitely mostly in that category 3. I really hope this doesn't sound like horribly mean or something. So that
you're just stirring up the Facebook content.
Yeah, I guess so.
Comments are
because they'll be like, "Well, of course I care about the amp or whatever." Yeah, I know you do. where do I? So I guess I'll come back to where I think I am generally, to say that when I noticed the comments on my particular thread, was some people would say, I don't really care what the amp is. I'll just put it on an amp stand. I just need to hear myself a little bit better. I think, and a lot of those were like jazz players or maybe a classical player that sort of does pseudo rock classical thing. And they're kind of saying, I only need the amp to make myself, so I can hear myself a little bit louder and that people can hear me. They're not using the amp as a anything more than that. So it doesn't matter if it's a solid state amp. It doesn't matter if it's straight into the PA. It doesn't matter. Like, they're like, oh, just put a monitor in front of me, I'm cool. Like, some people were kind of that attitude. The other people, more from the part, let's type 3, were like, well, I have an Axe FX, or I have a Helix, or I have a Kemper, or I have Neural DSP, or whatever. And or they have like some whole like switching system or something, and they play in a rock band. It's like a very, very like specific sound. So they're like, well, I'll just put in-ear monitors in, and you know, like that was kind of, or I'll put a monitor, I'll bring my own monitor and put it in front of me. And I think that that's satisfying. But then there's the people that middle category is really the one that struggles, I think, the most with sound. So because it really matters for that middle category to hear the amp in a certain way that most lets them use it. Because I did see some comments where they were like, well, it doesn't matter how you hear it. It matters how the audience hears it. So don't you want the audience to hear it? So don't turn up your amp, because the sound guys, now the stage volume's all messed up and like the sound. But they're like, what do you really want? You want the audience to be able to hear it good. Well, I would counter and say, well, presumably the people are coming to see you play for the thing that maybe you do or whatever. And if you're that kind of middle number 2 player or whatever that uses the amp as part of your instrument, then you can't do your thing without it. Like you need to be able to hear it, and you need to be able to hear it in a certain way. And presumably that's why they want to see you, because you do that thing. So where do I fall? So ignoring the sort of like more acousticy sort of things, I think for the longest time I was definitely type 3. And that was very much like, I have this sound and this sound and this sound. It was very like specific. I knew how to get to those sounds. I spent a lot of time sort of like getting to those sounds in a way. But in the last, and especially it's kind of funny, since that article in particular, or since that original post like 3 years ago, I've much more become a type 2 player. And part of that's because I've got better gear or whatever too, and gears that actually do the things that I want, like this red plate amp, which I've got fixed, by the way, or I fixed it myself, and it thankfully worked. And it sounds glorious. It's like you can really milk that amp and like play off of it and do all these things, and to be able to hear how it feels under your fingers and like how that thing happens. And it really does sound better when it's louder. And through certain speakers in a certain way. I can't get away with those other things anymore. And I think this is why I've sort of like gotten away from liking modeling so much and stuff like that, because I don't think it's very good at this particular thing yet. It doesn't play off of you the way that a great tube amp does. Where, again, like that red plate is an extension of my instrument. It, like, this guitar doesn't exist. Like my instrument is not the guitar. My instrument is the guitar and the amp. Like that's really what it's becoming. And it's like you might as well chop the guitar in half in a way if you can't get that experience. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about. Again, not all the time. Like with Red Side Visible, like a lot of the stuff is not like that really. It's a little more programmed. But like my ideal, like sort of like Stellar Regions is probably my most like Tim Murphy band in a way, at least for like expressive guitar playing or something, which I haven't put out an album out, but hopefully it's one day.
We'll get there.
That group in particular is very much going to be it's about milking those sounds and trying to do that. So, and I hope to bring that to like the jazz thing too. Like so right now I'm saying I'm more on that one, but I'd love to pull it more into two, where it's because I don't see that very much in that world, and I think it should be there.
I think that's one of the things that kind of shocked me a bit when I saw Chris Crocker play. Is I'm like, wait, he's playing jazz on a Strat?
Sure.
Like that.
Well, there's a lot of people that do that, though. I mean, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Honestly, he was like the first exposure where I saw somebody at that level that was. I mean, the Strat sounded super clean. I think he's got laces in that because there was no Strat hum.
I think it's just like Fender Deluxe, or what do they used to call those? The Strat Deluxe.
Yeah,
they don't make those anymore. I don't think.
That's what I had because I had the lace sensors in it. So. Way back in the day, but
there's like 14s on there or something.
Yeah, something super thick.
But yeah, he gets a great sound out of it.
Yep.
But I think he's more of that Type 1 guitar player.
He wants it. What guitar sound is to be the only thing that you hear,
and maybe even a little Type 3. I think it's a little less about milking the amp. And again, don't shoot the messenger here.
Yeah.
But it's a very specific sound. It sounds a certain way, and he wants it to sound a certain way. Most, isn't at least, let's say, I don't know what he's doing today with it exactly, but like at least previously, that's how it was. That's not to take away. Like I think so many great guitar players are in those other good categories.
It's not like this is a ranking scale in the sense of like this means you suck or you're better. It's just how do you find yourself in these particular. The hypothesis that you've come up with, like, how does this guy react? Like for myself, I'm definitely in one. Like that's the way I live in. It's gonna be the classical coming out as neutral as possible through that. And I mean by neutral, I mean I don't even want.
Please don't change the sound.
Yeah, don't touch the EQ because I'm gonna be handling that with my own playing. If I need to get a little bit brighter, I'll move on the guitar. I can do all that. Just don't touch it. I remember Pierre used to give sound headache all the time, because he would, in a good way, because he'd be like, his ear was that in tune where he's like, yeah, pull up the 44, and then he'd play like a bit of a song. He's like, yeah, shave off a little bit of the 60 hertz, and like totally knew the spectrum and where it laid on the guitar and how it was responding in the room. That's great. Hedges are the same thing, but those guys are totally number one. Totally, they want that particular thing with that, and I don't outside of yourself and a couple other people, it's like I don't know that many people that live in the amp aspect of that, and that's not a negative thing.
What's interesting, in an odd sort of way, two's sort of similar to one, because what happens when I go to a PA is what I want the PA to do is only represent the sound that's coming out of the amp. I don't want them to change that. So it's like almost the same thing, but like imagine extending your acoustic guitar to the amp too. So what I'll do is, since I run like 2 amps a lot of times, one of them will be wet, one of them is dry, and they'll try to make both amps the same volume. So they'll raise the wet amp volume in the mix because it's quieter. And I'm like, no, let me control, put them at the same fader level, same gain. I'm going to control how loud the wet amp is.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's kind of an interesting, because it's the same kind of deal. Like, don't try to get tricky with me. Just play what I'm like, represent what I'm presenting.
Whatever you do, don't touch the suck knob. Just don't turn that.
That's already on. That's on just because I'm there. But
so that's the best Far Side I think I've ever seen.
I don't think I saw it.
It's like it has like Jimmy's last. I think it's a Far Side, but just the caption is Jimmy's last day is the sound guy, and it has him at the board, and there's a big knob that says "suck," and he's like cranking it. It's like, yeah, that'll do it. That would do it. And the sound guys definitely factor in a huge amount. Getting a good sound guy is worth its weight. Sound person, yes. Whatever, as long as they're good at it, I don't care. Just show up and make it sound great. That's all that matters. And It's that, yeah, because I've done stuff where the guy is like, person is absolutely phenomenal, and other ones where it's they think they're phenomenal, and you're like, oh my god,
Yeah, it's
it's
interesting.
like,
So it's interesting being in like this sort of fusiony jazz world where the kick drum a lot of times is like it's pretty quick and there can be like almost ghost notes on the kick drum like
yeah,
you know, these kind of things. But when you go somewhere where there's a PA, a lot of times the sound person will make it like a metal band.
yeah, it's compressed.
So it's so compressed and like super gated. You just get like doom 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 doom, you know, whatever. It's like no, it needs to be like it shouldn't be like knocking people over. You gotta like it's got to be subtle and like you need these subtleties and stuff. Most, I mean, it's not the most popular genre in the world, no doubt, but most of the sound people don't. They just aren't used to it, so you have to talk to them about that. They usually change it back anyway. They go back to the big gated like kick you in the butt thing, but
That's just sound things, and not that we're bashing on sound guys or anything like that. It's guitaristic, stereotypical jokes, and there's good sound guys jokes, and there's bass player jokes. Everybody's got their own little niche of like, I'm dealing with this particular aspect, you know. Shoot. I don't remember the last time I played. Oh no, I guess I do remember the last time I played electric on a gig. I was doing that thing for the Ohio Light Opera, playing in the pajama game. It was a lot of fun, but like they reached out to do it, and they're like, "You're a classical guy," and I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Okay, can you do this?" And I'm like, "Sure." You know, I mean, the money was great. I wasn't going to turn it down. And I get there and I get the music, and it's total chord charts for a show with strumming and everything else. I'm like, all right. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get over the pit orchestra, even with my concert guitar in the pit and have the people hear me. Like even mic'd. It's like, it's just, I'm way too close to the other instruments and everything else. So like originally they had me bring my classical to the first rehearsal. And then I'm like, well, why don't I bring my acoustic with some type of PA speaker that I could throw in? You know, it's a small compact thing that I could stuff under the chair. And that wasn't enough to cut it. And I was like, you have a lead line in this one? Like there was a small solo in one section. I'm like, do you mind if I just bring my amp? You know, let me just bring the electric guitar and let's do it that way. And they're like, oh yeah, sure. That's exactly what we're going for. I'm like, okay. So, you know, it should have been that in the beginning, but you know, it was one of those things where it was, I was under the impression they were looking for a classical guy, and they were they were looking for one, you know, and then we kind of like through quick discovery, it's like, yeah, that's not going to work with a full orchestra unless it's the R and Wes and I'm sitting in the front type of thing. That isn't going to be it. So that ended up being like definitely a 2 because I had to use the amp as that voice for the electric guitar, you know, and I tweaked it all up for that particular gig in terms of like gain levels between my clean channel and my lead channel for that, my one little starring solo. And, you know, just on a side jaunt, just because it's one of those things where it's like, you know, if I would have just freaking known that yesterday, I could have made my life 10 times easier. Well, there was a track on it, you know, that it was a country western thing. Let's see. And it cooked, you know, it was in 2, you know, like that type of picking thing. But it was like 7 minutes long. You know, and that's fine for like a 3-minute song, but 7 minutes was like, I like got the sheet music. I'm like, oh my Lord in heaven, I am going to have to build up some serious endurance. And everybody would. So I literally like sat there for a week just drilling it with the metronome to get my picking hand going that quick and build up the sustain. And I'm going through the whole thing, and every show, it always seems like it was just out of reach. I did it okay, you know, and some nights were better than others. I was mostly on it. And I'm like, God, why am I just like always just a little bit? And then the second to last show, the conductor, you know, we were just talking, and we weren't talking about like how bad I was playing or anything like that. It was not that type of conversation. I was just looking at his score, and I'm like, wait, this is at 160. Mine says 150. He's like, oh yeah, don't ignore that. Do this one. I'm like, well, if I would have known, I would have been drilling it at that thing, because I always felt like I was out of shape there. And I'm like, I definitely drilled it. I was playing that song for 20 minutes, you know, just to make sure I could hold it.
Yeah.
And then after the whole freaking thing, I sat down and I was like, like using my fingers and getting the same tempo without a problem, like not struggling into the strumming. And I'm like, seriously? Like I just went 3 months of playing this, like from drilling it with the pick, and I literally sat down and just could do it with my, because it was like a quasi tremolo, and that was like I already had that going. You know, if I would have known, I would have wrecked my nails on it, but it would have been worth it because it would have been a hell of a lot easier.
That reminds me of this Jewish wedding gig I did, which I'd done some of these kind of things previously, but the last time I did it, it was like all in ears. There's a monitor for each player where the pages would change, and there was like a concert master and everything, and they would actually change the pages. Hundreds of tunes,
Wow.
all sight reading, and I would switch between playing rhythm and melodies. And I'd never seen these tunes, you know, or maybe they might have sent. I don't know. But I mean, there's like hundreds of tunes. It's like impossible to go through every tune in some reasonable amount of time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was a sight reading gig, and there was a concert master, and so imagine there was a whole band. There's horns. I think there was sax and trumpet, bass, keyboards, two drummers, and like 2 or 3 singers. And then the concert person who would be in your ear. So it's all in-ear monitors sitting at this thing. I was playing through a modeler kind of thing, you know. And I had to take solos every once in a while. So this is like Jewish, let's say Jewish rock music. I wish I knew the name of it. I'm going to do it just justice, whatever the type of music it's called. Which is incidentally, that particular style of Jewish music really like shred guitar. Like, so, anyway, every song was that tempo, you know, like, I don't know, whatever tempo it was. And so what would happen is that the sheet music would be in front of you, and it would be like, hey, on the 5th bar, we're going to switch to the other chart on the next page and start. So it'd be like in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then switch right to the next chart. Same tempo, different key, different chords, follow that. That page would shift over, and then a new chart would pop up kind of thing. And you'd be playing through this chart. And this went on for like, I think it was like a 3-hour gig. And it was all like bar chords.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And or I would play the melody. I would like play the melody just to like save my life. You know, like double the melody with the horns, or like do a harmony or something. So I'm like, also you're like reading at tempo, and it was quick. It was probably like 150 beats per minute or something. I just remember my like forearm after that gig was just shot. Like I was like, I'm like, I don't know if I can pick up my keys.
Yeah.
And it was kind of fun though, in a way, you know. It was a pretty interesting gig. So I kind of remember that. I was also gonna say I used to do a lot of pit orchestra stuff a long time ago, and I always thought that the guitar stuff's always really funny in those, right? Like especially if you play a bunch of different shows.
Oh yeah.
I was working with these people that like every week there was a different show, kind of thing. So, and it would be the Broadway score, you know. And it's like half the time, like half the notes aren't even on the guitar, that you know,
exactly.
they're way out of range or something. And then one would have like sometimes they'd have good chord symbols or something, and other times they just write the notes, and you know, you never know what you're gonna get. And there's like these weird time signatures and stuff that happen.
The chord and be like, that what?
Yeah, what chord is that?
How the hell? You know, just kind of trying to figure it out, and it's like, I want that voice. I'm like, that voicing is impossible unless I'm like this, you know. And for that brief second that it goes by, you're getting that.
Yeah.
You know, it's like whatever. I'm just playing the power chord.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then, you know what I noticed with those gigs too is like, when anytime there's like a guitar solo thing, or like the guitar is like a real part of the thing and not just like a rhythm instrument. It's always like they just want the like the most cheesy cliche like guitarisms. It's always, and that's what they want. Like that's the selling point. And I kind of wonder too, like, do other instruments have that same feel? It's like you're a violinist and it's like, oh, here's the cheesy violin thing that we always have to do.
Yep.
Oh, I'm a flute. I guess I better do a trill.
There it is.
Yeah.
Probably. I mean, they're all cliches for it.
Everybody's got like their little cliche thing, and we're just like we stack all these things on top of each other, and it's great music.
Yep. Yep. It works. It's what was it? There was and they always throw it all in flat keys. So if you're ever gonna get a gig, you ain't playing open chords, not for long. You'll get like a little respite if they going like.
It is the place, it's funny. Like in all my music like career, you really don't see like a lot of stuff in D flat major, or C sharp major, or whatever, F sharp major. Yeah, sometimes, but it's fairly rare. But yeah, when you play pit shows, because it's all like tuned to singers and stuff.
Yep.
A lot of times you do get those keys. It's like G flat major, and you're like, wow, I don't remember the last time I played G flat major.
I never played that, and of course, they don't put it in F sharp. That would be like more of a
right.
Thing.
Yeah, and it just happens because either it was a just poor writing, or it maybe if there was a good reason it was G flat because it was the fourth or whatever. It was the
Either way.
Yeah, so some kind of resolution to some other key or something. But yeah, either way, you end up in these places where it's like you never see that stuff anywhere else, really.
Mm-hmm. And it's fun, but it makes me think that those guys that were doing the shows hated guitar players. Like, how can I screw with these guys for the entire time? I know.
I think they just don't know. You just don't know how to do it.
I did do one where it was the Man of La Mancha, and I was subbing for somebody on that, and there was one song of it that was in B flat. It started in B flat minor, and then went up to B minor. I'm like, they clearly hate the guitar players. Like, and this was another one where it's like 6.5 to 8 minutes, depending on how the singers went with it. So I was just like, screw this, and I just brought a capo, and I just played it in A minor, and then I played it in B flat minor for like the end of it when it did the key change, and I'm like, I'm not
that was easier for you than going from B flat to B minor.
Oh yeah, ton because it gave me open chords because most of it was in B flat minor, like most of the thing,
and it was all like strummy chord stuff.
Oh yeah, yep.
Okay.
Constant chords, everything else. It's like you get to the point where your thumb is just totally dead, and you're kind of just pushing things, and hoping that it all comes out, and it's just like, okay.
It's true too. Yeah, there are like some like strum this chord, and you're like, it's not a good chord to strum, like whatever it is. You're like, that's not gonna sound very good. I don't like who thought that was a good sounding chord.
Apparently, the guy that hates guitar players. So
it's interesting, like when you work with different conductors. Most of them are average, let's say average in a sense, but you occasionally get those like conductors who like hear every little thing.
Oh yeah,
yeah. They're like, you're not playing the ninth in that chord or whatever. Like I don't hear the You're like, dang, like there's 70 other instruments and you happen to hear.
What the hell are you picking on me?
Yeah, but no, it's actually really amazing, right? Those are incredible musicians. With monster ears, or they're picking on guitar players. But
the guy that with the Ohio Light Opera, the thing that amazed me with him is he was doing 3 different shows with it because they like rotate like 6 different operas during that entire season. He was doing 3, and they had another guy doing the other 3. But this guy had to be the most organized man on the planet. Like it was awe-inspiring because seriously, he had the full concert score and the actual play intertwined. He like set up his books so that he would open them both ways and follow along with everything. It was stunningly done, like super efficient. And he was a great guy, a phenomenal conductor, all around. I was really, really glad to work with him. And so the other guy with Man of La Mancha was as well. But this dude was just, when he showed up, it was relaxing as a player because you knew he was in control. You're like, all right, this is not going to be a problem, and it's going to go really well and everything's going to be fine. And that was an excellent experience. I would love to work with him again in that regard because it's like, all right, sweet, we're on. He definitely knows what he wants. He's going to tell me exactly what he wants when he wants it. It's going to be clear, and that's it. And that helps calm my nerves a little bit because that fast song was, I would always dread it. It was number 13 in the book. It's like, oh God, here it comes. Lucky 13. Whew. And I'm done. And that would be like right before the break. So that was good because I had all that bar chord, and then I got a chance to go get it in the water and come back. Dip my arm into ice water or something.
I remember thinking too, like before playing jazz, I played just rock music, and you play bar chords all the time, and you get good at it, and it's like no big deal at all. Like you don't think about it. But then when you don't do it, and then you have to do it, you're like, wow, this really takes some
Yeah.
energy. Yeah.
Yep. The old, like, I remember watching Dave Matthew going, how the hell does this guy play bar chords for 3 hour shows? Like, how do you do, what type of endurance thing? And then it was like, oh, well, you get there eventually, when you do it a lot, just whatever. And there's always as I tell my students, so as soon as you start thinking weight rather than squeeze, like the weight of your fingers and arm versus compression, you get a whole lot more endurance because you're working with gravity and the way the guitar is versus just brute strength,
Yeah.
which lasts for a while, and then it's just like, oh my god, I can't move my fingers.
I have the days of, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I think I can get it. I hope I can get it. Here goes. Sorry, you're just getting the roots for a little bit till I can get my fingers back to move, or whatever. But
Yeah,
those
sure.
times were mainly during rehearsal. Like a whole show, it would be tiring, but you'd be able to do it. But like the rehearsals where it was like 4 hours of rehearsal and let's run that one again. Seriously, that one with the bar chords. Okay. And I would do that. I mean, I would sit there and just do the power chords. And I'm just like, I can't keep doing that and move it that well and get it defined. I started playing 5 bar chord, like this type of bar chord, just with the one finger, just to make my life simpler, which is actually a great little.
That actually reminds me of there's this guy. I might have sent you a thing of his this week. Alex Mosley. He played with Lisa called Jam Band. Like maybe the most impressive natural musician I've ever met, possibly. Just a little. So he played at Lisa called Jam Band, but he used to play with Bobby Brown and all these people.
Nice.
In Brooklyn. So when I was in Brooklyn, interesting guy. Plays. So he would come to this music store, but he plays guitar and he can like play all this like McLaughlin stuff and like just like a monster guitar player. And he actually plays bass mostly, but then he plays piano. And I actually remember the day where he was like, "Oh man, have you checked? I just checked out Art Tatum." And then like a week later, he came back to the store and he's playing like Art Tatum stuff on the piano. Like he learned it by ear, and he couldn't read a lick of music, not one lick.
I hate those people.
And
it's a good thing.
he could hear it and he could play. Like if he heard some chord, he could hear it and just play something back for you. He could just monster ears, and he would do like studio sessions or whatever. Anyway, long story short, he used to play with Bobby Brown, and a lot of the music was really repetitive. So like the guitar part would just be like, boom, whatever, boom, for 30 minutes. And he was like, he's like, yeah, first you play it like the normal way, whatever it was, but then your hand would start getting tired, so then you'd like switch to like anything to like make it like, because your hand would just get tired, like, or whatever it was, like just something to like, because your hand would get so tired from playing that same thing over and over and over again, especially like with like funk music and stuff, where a lot of it's the power of it is the repetition of that thing, not changing it. So it was kind of funny.
What defines hard in a particular style with a lot of repetition?
Yeah.
It's an endurance thing, and that clearly takes a lot. It takes a lot of chops to just be able to do that. And I think that's one of the things that, at least for myself, it's like for my own musical journey, and we should probably end somewhere with this. I think it's been late. But for my own musical journey, it's like when I started out playing guitar, it was like as soon as I could nail a hard lick, I thought it was the hot stuff, and it's just like, aha, I'm this much better than this guy, and these guys suck, and da 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 da. And then the more I got into playing, the more exposure I got to playing and different styles of playing, and mainly, I'd say within the last like 7 to 10 years, getting my ears opened to the intricacies of other styles in a really deep way. versus just kind of like, oh, I'm just not going to listen to that, or whatever, where it's like, no, I got to play it. And I'm not just talking classical, I'm talking like funk, jazz, blues, pop,
Sure.
even pop and stuff like that. It's like, all right, there's a hell, that seems to be my word tonight. There's a heck of a lot of work that goes into each of these styles, even though it's relatively quote unquote simplistic in its overarching structure. It doesn't mean to get to that point that did it. And I was talking with a good buddy of mine who just got signed for doing all electronic stuff. Like he's the electronic whiz kid. I've done stuff over Zoom with him, and the way he flies around Pro Tools doing like different effects for synth stuff, it's like, yeah, that's a lot of familiarity that I don't have for that, but I don't live in that world. So whichever, but my point is that like, he's working on this tune, and he's like, the difficulty with the pop music is everything has to have a hook. Everything has to be able to kind of like pull you in with that. And it has to be good, but you don't want to overdo it, to the point of now it's cheesy. It's like, so you have like all these little small parts of like 10 to 20 seconds of music that has to have this hook to it. And you have to have that going for like 5 minutes or 3.5,
Right.
But he's like, that's a tough thing. It's like, how do you keep it up that entire time? And so that was really eye-opening, more so than just being like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool how they mix that type of thing. It's like, no, that's where the work aspect of it comes in. I don't necessarily throw it on all the time, if at all, but that's just a personal preference. And I think that's one of the things that we as musicians gotta the mature. I'll just come out and say what my thoughts are, and then watch hopefully watch the comment system blow up with stuff like this. But like, I think that a mature musician, you can tell I'm getting tired. A mature musician can appreciate the work that goes into styles that they don't necessarily go, hey, I'm going to listen to that. It's like, yeah, I get what's going on. Okay, that's cool, but I'm going to listen to this over here. And like the other guys that play that style are the same thing. They're like, yeah, I really like this style, and I get what you're doing over there, and I can respect that, but I ain't going to be turning that on when I'm just enjoying music.
Sure.
Just a sign of just growing up.
Yeah, I think like I know when I started playing, like, well, you go through those phases, especially in the beginning, where it's like, this is the greatest thing ever, and everything else sucks. Only my style is good. Everything else is horrible.
Yeah.
And then, at some point, it starts to, like, I don't think about it like that at all anymore.
Yeah, same.
I like it all. There's not much I don't like. I'm not sure there's only one particular style that I'm like, I really struggle to like it all. Which I guess I'll just say, which is pop country. I just, I have a really hard time just enjoying it. And I think that's me. That's my problem to deal with. I can generally enjoy, like, I'm not going to be like, oh, that's a bluegrass. I'll be like, oh, cool, let's check it out. Or that's even like 60s country or something, like, yeah, I'll check it out. Why not? I'm going to go into it with a positive attitude. Or pop. Today, I don't mind listening to pop. My kids listen to pop all the time, so I get to hear it a lot. Or whatever it's called. I guess it's always pop, but the current music of today's, like, that's coming
radio.
out. Yeah, radio, new music.
Yeah,
it's fine. There's something I can get out of it. Just I might not gravitate towards it all the time, but I can appreciate it. But yeah, it's funny. Like, for the longest time, I hated so much stuff, and I guess it's just growing up,
And it's growing up, and I think the other big thing that was great with that is that, God, I wasted so much stupid energy being negative.
Oh yeah,
it's like, if I would have taken my attitude, like if I could go back and meet myself at 17 after I've been playing for a while and kick my own, it's just like you're being a pompous little prick, and get over yourself a little bit. I would, and kind of open the ears in a different way. It's like the easiest thing to do would be like to take that 17-year-old kid and go, here, you play it.
No doubt. So, last question, we'll close it off. Would your 17-year-old self like anything that you're playing now?
That is a big question.
Just a quick yes or no, and then we'll get into it next time or something.
All right, sounds like a deal. And I would say no.
Yeah, I feel the same. They'd be disappointed.
I'm disappointed in myself in this weird
But
thing.
imagining what that person wanted compared to what I like now, I'm glad that didn't happen, I guess. But
Yeah, the same camp. It's like I never, out of any genre and everything at that age, I never would have picked this guy's going to be classical,
yeah,
like for myself. And now it's like that's pretty much all that I live in, unless I'm writing on for another project or something like that. It's
sure.
just. Speaking of which, I'm almost done with Schindler's List. There, those harmonics on the end have been completely mapped out. I've ditched the ones that are literally impossible and no idea where to play. But and I just fretted them. I mean, I didn't bother to look to see if anybody else did it. I just figured I'd put my own spin on it. But it's getting there. Got the last page to kind of work through, and the only part that's hard is the harmonics. So, and hard being that it's going to be fast. That's it.
Cool.
Cool.